Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Cause. Today, we are unpacking a really fascinating case study that sits right at the intersection of civil society, environmental activism. And rather than complex machinery that keeps it all running, we are going to dive deep into the structural, operational, and financial anatomy of Greenpeace India. So, whether you are a policy nerd, intersected in the inner working of NGOs, or just curious about the real delicate balance between the state regulation and activism, we are going to lay it out all for you right here. Let's get right into it. So here is our roadmap for the day. We will be covering the mission and advocacy, their major campaigns and impact, the funding engines that drives them, the foreign funds conflict, and finally how it all resolved legally. Alright, section 1, mission and scientific advocacy. So, to start things off, what exactly is Greenpeace India? Well, they are a legally registered Indian environmental non-government organization. And yeah, while they are a branch of that massive global Greenpeace network, we all know they actually operate with their own headquarters, based in Bangalore, along with the regional branches in cities like Delhi, Chagai, and Patna. They were founded with a laser focus on environmental protection. And a really crucial part of their whole identity is that they operate completely independent of political or corporate affiliations. This independence is basically the whole shebang. It's designed to maintain impartial advocacy. By refusing money from governments or corporations, they ensure they can speak totally freely about environmental issues without any strings attached. Now, how do they actually get things done? Their approach is actually built on 4 core principles and that relies heavily on the ground scientific research. We are talking hard data collection, like air qualities, monitoring, and satellite deforestation mapping. They take the data and use it to drive policy advocacy, where they engage directly with the lawmakers. And then when that isn't quite enough to move the turn to non-violent direction action and community mobilization to really raise public awareness and empower everyday citizens to demand environmental justice. Moving right along to section 2, major campaigns and impact. Their evolution over the years is genuinely fascinating to watch. Back in 2001, working side by side with affected workers, they actually managed to force the closure of Hindustan Unilever Mercury thermometer plant down in pollution, eventually forcing the company to clean up the toxic waste. So by 2010, they had leveled up into some serious high-level legislative influence. Running these really successful campaigns to ensure suppliers' liability was baked right into India's nuclear liability bill. And then in 2014, we see the big shift. They go from just protesting problems to physically building solutions. Which brings us to incredibly cool milestone, 100. The numbers represents the kilowatt capacity of massive solar they built in Darnai, a village in Bihar. This project cost around 3 crore rupees and it was designed to provide round-the-clock electricity to 450 households and 50 commercial operations. It was this incredible, powerful physical demonstration of renewable energy independence. They basically wanted to prove right there on the ground that decentralized, clean energy could reach the places that traditional power grids has completely failed to serve. Section 3, the funding engine. So, executing all these large-scale advocacy projects takes a massive amount of capital. So, how does an organization that absolutely refuses state and corporate funding actually stay afloat? Well, like many NGOs worldwide, they have to carefully balance 2 main financial avenues. On one hand, you have traditional grants from large foundations. These offers massive stable sums of money, but they are insanely competitive and usually come with really strict restrictions on how the funds can be spent. On the other hand, you have got individual giving or crowdfunding. This completely democratizes the fundraising process and gives the organizations flexible cash to use where it's most needed. But it can be wildly unpredictable. to try and build a predictable, sustainable base of individual donors. Greenpeace India leans heavily on a strategy called direct dialogue recruitment. You have almost certainly seen this in action before. Fundraisers engage the public face-to-face right on the streets. They start a conversation about the pressing environmental crisis, and the ultimate goal is to step 3, registering those interested individuals as a regular financial donors or volunteers. It is a super grassroots, labor-intensive method, but it pays off, building a deeply invested domestic support here in the base. What's absolutely wild here is looking at their actual financial breakdown right before the big crisis hit in 2014. A whopping 60% of their funding was already coming directly from domestic Indian donors. Just 38% was coming from Greenpeace International over in the Netherlands. And a tiny 1% came from the US-based climate work foundations. But despite having this really strong domestic majority, it was that 38% of international money that was about to trigger an existential threat to the entire organization. Which brings us to the section 4, the foreign fund conflict. So the legal mechanism right at the center of the massive conflict is the FCRA, the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. This act essentially empowers the Indian government to heavily regulate any foreign donations coming in. In practice, this means the state can effectively run off the financial tap of an NGO overnight in the name of ensuring domestic stability. As part of a much broader trend of tightening oversight of civil society, the government began meticulously scrutinizing Greenpeace India's financial compliance under the exact act. Now, we really need to look at the impartiality, because we have two complete divergent narratives going head to head here. From the government perspective, they argued that the NGO was acting against the India's broader economic interest. They claimed Greenpeace was physically preventing new nuclear and coal-based energy projects, so stalling national growth, and outright violating FCR rules by mixing funds and hiding accounts. Greenpeace, on the flip side, maintained that they were entirely compliant with the law. They viewed the whole situation as a coordinated smear campaign designed specifically to silence dissent and allow rapid industrialization to bypass environmental protection law. 7. This is where things escalated dramatically. The conflict hit an absolute breaking point in April 2015. The government suspended Greenpeace India's FCRA registration, completely blocking their access to foreign funds. But even more devastatingly, they froze 7 of their domestic bank accounts. This instantly thrust the organization into a severe financial crisis. Almost overnight, their ability to pay rent, run campaigns, or even just pay their staff was severely threatened. Their executive director at that time, Samit H, publicly stated that a campaign was waged against dissent, but they absolutely would not be cowed. And in a really extraordinary move, despite the frozen accounts, Greenpeace staff made the decision to continue working and volunteering without pay just to keep the environmental campaign alive. They explicitly stated that they had ultimate faith that the Indian judicial system would resolve this matter. Section 5. Legal battle and resolution. When the executive branch and civil society reached a stalemate, the battles inevitably moved into the courts, and what followed was basically a multi-year, high-stake legal ping-pong match. Let's break it down. In May 2015, the court provided some interim relief, unblocking those domestic accounts so day-to-day operation could just survive. Then in November 2015, the Madras High Court stepped in to halt a government order that would have completely deregistered the NGO, citing a failure of natural justice. But the pressure didn't let up. Fast forward to October 2018, and the Enforcement Directorate again froze their accounts, which unfortunately led to several staff layoffs. Finally, in February 2019, the Karnataka High Court stepped in with a major decision. The Karnataka High Court looked at every specific legal mechanism. They found that the Enforcement Directorate's freeze order actually had a strict legal expiration limit of 60 days. Because that 60-day period that lapsed without any further justification action from the state, the court officially quashed the freeze order, legally returning access to the bank accounts back to Greenpeace India. This 2019 victory was an absolute game changer for them. It allowed the organization to finally stabilize its remaining workforce, and they viewed the court's decision as a huge affirmation that they had been functioning in accordance with Indian law all along, because their foreign funding channel remained largely cut off by the initial FCRA suspension. Greenpeace India had successfully pivoted. They now rely entirely on domestic citizen donation to keep their vital campaigns on climate change and carbon emission running. So that leaves us here. We have looked at how an organization uses on-the-ground science to advocate for the planet, how they fund that incredibly difficult mission, and exactly what happens when those funds trigger intense state scrutiny. This is where modern donation software like ZenDonor could have made a transformative impact. ZenDonor is a purpose-built fundraising ecosystem designed specifically for non-profits. ZenDonor is a purpose-built fundraising ecosystem designed specifically for non-profits. Greenpeace India has utilized a system like this during their crisis. Automated compliance. ZenDonor automates the generation of tax exemption certificates and receipts, ensuring every donation is recorded accurately for FCRA reporting, potentially avoiding the underreporting allegations that led to their account freeze. Centralized donor database. Instead of fragmented tools, they would have had a single platform to track donor history and preferences, which is vital for maintaining a loyal donor base during time of organization's stress. Improved transparency. Automated thank you emails and campaign updates would have kept donors engaged and informed, building the connection and commitment, which is necessary to survive a funding crisis. Scalability. As an organization growing across 55 countries, ZenDonor's ability to handle large database and multiple campaigns would have allowed for sustainable growth without administrative burnout. Greenpeace India's journey is a testament to the power of environmental advocacy and the vital importance of operational resilience. By moving away from manual process to smarter automated solutions like ZenDonor, non-profits can spend less time on paperwork and more time on what truly matters.